Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Institute for Australian Chinese Arts and Culture at Western Sydney University. I'm Professor Jing Han, the director of the Institute. Post the referendum, it is particularly important to acknowledge that Indigenous and Torres Strait Island peoples are the First Nations of this continent, and acknowledge that we are on the country of the Darug people of the Darug Nation, and acknowledge their ancestors who have been the traditional owners of their country for thousands of years. We also want to pay our respect to the First Nations elders, past, present, and emerging. Welcome to the RAC Art Talks. So far, we have had 5 talks of very different topics, which makes this series really interesting. Today, we are having lecture 6 on Chinese modernist artist and Literati spirit, the life and work of Lin Fengmian and Sanyu, a fascinating topic. I'm really looking forward to it, by Liu Dapeng. Dapeng was our exhibiting artist. We held his solo exhibition last year, and it was a very popular and accessible show. So we know Dapeng as an artist really well. Before he became a full-time and a celebrated artist, Dapeng has been trained as a researcher. He spent several years in his postgraduate, including PhD studies in art history at the University of Sydney, where he was the recipient of an Australian Postgraduate Award, APA scholarship from the federal government. His research examined both traditional Chinese art and culture, as well as the modernization of art in China. This experience in art history has enabled Dapeng as an artist to critically engage with his main subject of creation, mountainscapes and waterscapes, which centers on an ultimate question, the relationship between nature and humankind. As an artist, Dapeng is a 3-time Archibald Prize finalist, 2014, 2021, and 2022, with the last one being Dr. Jiang Yu. Many of you may have seen it. Dapeng is an amazing artist whose mountainscapes and landscapes are mind-blowing. He is now having his new solo show at Art Atrium called Stillness Just Posed. You are all welcome to the opening, and the exhibition. I'm absolutely certain is going to be fantastic because he's going to show lots of his new works. And his works are held in private and public collections in Australia and internationally. So at the end of Dapeng's talk, we will take questions from audiences. And when Dapeng gives his talk, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen, and I will collect them when Dapeng finishes his talk, and he will answer those questions. Now, please welcome Dapeng Liu to give us the talk.
Hello, everyone. And first of all, I want to thank Professor Han for giving me this opportunity to have a talk and to share my thoughts with everyone. And also, I want to thank Professor Han for have established this perfect platform for knowledge and ideas to be shared among people who love art and culture. And I also want to thank the IAC team, Sally, Yanni, and Lindsay, for liaising and the preparations that make this talk possible today. And to begin with, I would like to mention that I will be delivering this talk from an artist's point of view. The history and subjects involved in this talk are quite big and complex and contain many names and terms in Chinese. My aim is to provide an overview of the subjects and extract key points so that this can become an entry point for people with an interest to look more into the topic. The statements made in this talk are quite personal and are the result of my reading and thinking as a practicing artist for the past 9 years. So I will start my PPT. As the title implies, I will discuss two key figures of the 20th century Chinese modernist art, Lin Fengmian and Sanyu. However, rather than solely gaining an impression of the two individuals' life and works, I do have a more ambitious goal that I hope to achieve. This is to show the audience that when we are looking at artworks created by Chinese modernist artists, we first need to consider that most of these artists were born in the late 19th and early 20th century, around the downfall of the last imperial dynasty in China. And that was a turbulent period of time when old met new, East met West. Therefore, for deeper and a more thorough understanding of this generation of artists, paying attention only to the modern influences from the West is not sufficient. The intellectual traditions in China's own history needs to be examined at the same time. Before we start looking at Lin Fengmian and Sanyu, let us first talk about the historical background. The first encounter with Western art in China. The influences of European-born modern art reached China in the early 20th centuries. However, this was not the first time that Western art had been introduced to China. The earliest recorded introduction of Western oil paintings into China can be traced back to Wan Li's reign, 1563 to 1620, which is in the late 16th century in Ming Dynasty. An Italian Jesuit missionary, Michel Ruggieri, whose Chinese name was Luo Mingjian, arrived in Macau, China in 1579. He was considered the first man to bring oil paintings, of course, religious art, into China. Around the same time, religious oil paintings were also included in the tributes that the famous missionary Matteo Ricci paid to the Chinese emperor. The visual experience and knowledge of Western-style paintings stayed mostly within the imperial court for the next 300 years till the end of the 19th century and had very little influence in society. Interestingly, it was mainly the technical side of oil painting, which featured linear perspective and chiaroscuro, meaning the light and shadow technique, that had caught attention in the court. Aside from the reference to linear perspective techniques seen in some of the court architectural paintings, in Chinese is jiehua. The 1,000-year-old tradition of Chinese aesthetics in painting had not been changed by the introduction of Western-style painting. As seen in the works of the most famous Italian Jesuit missionary painter, Giuseppe Castiglione, known in China as Lang Shining, who spent almost 50 years serving 3 Chinese emperors as a court artist. He had adopted more traditional Chinese painting techniques and aesthetics into his art rather than keeping them in the Italian way. So we do have one example of Castiglione's painting in this slide. The difference between the Eastern and Western way of artistic creation was really a matter of how to observe the world and how to transplant such understanding to a painting. George Staunton, who was a secretary to Lord Macartney's mission to China in the 1790s, recorded in his book An Historical Account of the Embassy to the Emperor of China that Chinese think the light and shadow on an object is occasional and temporary. Such occasional presence should not be painted, as that will impair the original look of the object. Furthermore, they did not agree with how perspective changes the sizes of objects on the painting according to their position, They believe that the change of sizes is only an illusion to the eyes. In painting, such illusion should be corrected. So that was George Staunton's record. I remember clearly that I was so fascinated reading this for the first time. I directly thought about Paul Cézanne. I thought about how Cézanne subjectively observed his subject matters, abandoned conventional uses of perspective and light and shadow. Cézanne subsequently changed how artists see and perceive the world, and has been described as the father of modern art. The premature end of modern art in China. Unlike oil paintings that have been first brought to China by foreigners, in the early 20th century, young Chinese artists who had studied abroad actively introduced, promoted, and practiced Western-style art back home. Right from the beginning of the 20th century, considerable numbers of art students from China started arriving in France and Japan, and also other European countries and the USA to pursue their art education. These young artists can be separated into two groups: those who follow the classical academy method and the others who have been attracted by modern art movements. Many of the modernist painters have been inspired by Impressionism, with some also experimenting with Cubism, Expressionism, and Fauvism. To name a few of the key modernist painters, there were Lin Fengmian, Liu Haisu, Pan Yuliang, Wu Dayu, Feng Junbi, the Storm Society artists, and so on. With the return of these artists, apart from Beijing, Hangzhou, and Suzhou, 1920s and 1930s Shanghai became the center of Western art activities. In Shanghai alone, led by Shanghai Academy of Art, there were at least 3 other art schools established. Lin Fengmian was the principal of the National Hangzhou Art Academy for 10 years, and he even had a small zoo in the academy for students and teachers to sketch, not to mention the many large sculptures that have been brought back from Europe. That was indeed a glorious time. So we are lucky to be able to see one of the photo of the old Hangzhou Art Academy, which is shown in this slide. In addition, in 1920s Shanghai, there were more than 30 art associations and societies established. The Storm Society was among the most renowned, and many of its members were key modernist artists, with Zhao Wuqi as a prominent example. During this time, numerous art journals were also in publication with original and translated essays that focused on topics of art theories and new art styles. One pivotal artist of that time, Liu Haisu, published an essay sarcastically titled The Betrayer of Art in the journal 艺术, it means art in English, in February 15, 1925. In this essay, he highly praised and regarded Vincent van Gogh as the leader of all betrayers. The word betrayer was used by him to refer to the modernist artists who break free from the restraint of conventions. Unfortunately, the modern art movement in China was quite short-lived, spanning at most 30 years from the 1910s till the late 1930s. The outbreak of the Sino-Japanese War in the late 1930s abruptly turned the pages of art history in China from modern art to a long period of art of wartime and revolution, dominated by revolutionary romanticism and socialist realism style. The aforementioned academic style art in China, led by the famous artist Xu Beihong, was favored by authorities and subsequently transformed to serve the purpose of propaganda and to arouse patriotic sentiments. Changes to this dominance only occurred 50 years later in the mid to late 1980s. In comparison, the West has already moved forward from modern art and entered the phase of contemporary art for about 20 years. With the death of Andy Warhol and Basquiat in the late 1980s, the art world had seen movements of abstract expressionism, the neo-Dada, pop art, minimalism, New Expressionism, and so much more. No doubt, the premature end of modern art movement in China profoundly affected the scene of art in China today. If we consider the ebbs and flows of history as an outside factor that changes the fate of modern art in China, there is also a major challenge from within that modern art had to face from the time it had been introduced into China. The challenge. The challenge of modern art in China lies in its tension between the thousand-year-old tradition in China and the sudden influx of new art forms from the already industrialized West. Originated in Europe, modern art was a departure from classical principles in art creation, and is generally identified to have lasted from the 1860s to the 1970s. The many modern art movements reflected changes in the modern society and were closely associated with the development in art theories, philosophy, science, and technology. For example, there were close ties between the Fauvist movement and anarchism, and how Dada artists had rejected rationality and capitalism. Another example is Jackson Pollock, during the last wave of the Modernist movement in the 1950s, whose art had been inspired by Carl Jung's theory of the collective unconscious. Before we start looking at the development of modern art in China in the early 20th century, we first need to understand that the driving forces and ideas hidden under the colorful surface of modern art were Western philosophy, science, and technology. Such knowledge had only been more systematically studied and introduced into China at the turn of the 20th century by young Chinese scholars who studied overseas. It was quite a similar picture to the beginning of modern art in China. A cohort of young Chinese artists were indeed attracted by the immediacy, the spontaneity, the vibrant color, expressive texture and forms and new concepts embedded in modern art, but at the same time lacked an in-depth understanding of the intellectual history of Western thoughts and knowledge from the very beginning. This dilemma had been aware by the artists, and many of them, such as Lin Fengmian, in his young adult years, started reading a lot of Western philosophy while living overseas. Although they actively sought change, most of them still grew up and completed their early education in the most traditional Chinese way, or in other words, the Confucian way. The family's social and cultural imprints had unnoticeably and permanently marked their interiority. This could be why a lot of this group of artists, when older, showed more Chinese traditions through their works rather than keeping up with Western movements. Even for the artists like Sanyu and Zhao Wuqi, who remained living in the West and always explored in the modernist styles, when we admire their art today, it is still the strong sense of traditional artistic tradition of China that is most appealing. This shows how they were trying to find peace in their heart, almost like an instinct, trying to build a deeper connection to their mother culture. A good example is the renowned Chinese artist Ding Yangyong. He studied art in Tokyo in the early 1920s and was a pioneering modernist artist who experimented with Fauvism. People called him the Matisse of the East. From the 1940s, Ding developed a strong passion for and found peace in traditional Chinese ink and water art, thus entering another phase of his art. He received a new nickname thereafter. he has been called the modern Bada Shenren. Bada Shenren was an old master Chinese painter of the 17th century. Thereafter, apart from his ongoing series of oil paintings, his modern literati style ink and water painting had become central in his artistic exploration. Ding once criticized Western art in an article, saying that Western art had come to a dead end from overly realistic to overly superficial, and argued that art in the East pays more attention to the inner realm. I think such a conclusion clearly shows that Ding's inner force for his creativity was bounded to traditional Chinese intellectual thinking. Western art, modern or contemporary, definitely pays much attention to the inner realm too, but I would say with different approaches underlaying with different principles and thoughts. The literati spirit. So how can we understand the traditional thoughts that have played such an important role among this generation of modernist Chinese artists? It would be too vague and general to just assign this to Confucianism. Therefore, I have borrowed the term literati spirit, using it to try understanding the spiritual foundation of this generation of artists. The first task is always the definition. Let's first look at the word literati. Literati in Chinese refers to 文人. It simply means intellectual or scholar. Art historian Craig Clunas used the word elite to address similar meanings. In pre-modern China, a literati, at the standard of Confucianism, was a person with high level of knowledge, literacy, and moral values. And importantly, literati should also be accomplished in art. The art of the literati in traditional China was an inseparable organic integrity of poetry, calligraphy, painting, and seal engraving, which in Chinese is called 诗书画印. Sometimes it even included musical instrument and chess playing. This is really a whole spectrum of lifestyle. The origin of such integrity can be traced back to the Six Dynasties and Jin Dynasty period, more than 1,500 years ago. Evolved during the Tang and Song dynasties from the 7th to the 13th centuries, the art of the literati increasingly matured after the Yuan dynasty from the 13th and the 14th century. This type of art had also become the ultimate pursuit in life for many literati. Under the Confucian ideology, high moral standards, the nurturing of virtue and harmony between man and nature are essential to humanity. Therefore, the literati spirit can be understood as an ongoing process of self-cultivation for the literati to achieve higher moral standard and successively to find better connection between the heart and the nature. The above-mentioned art of the literati thus became the most important vehicle that they used during this process of self-cultivation and introspection. To better portray the literati spirit, I would like to use the example of an important Ming Dynasty painter Shen Zhou, who was born in 1427 and died at the age 83 in 1509. Shen was credited as one of the four masters of the Ming Dynasty. Following his grandfather Shen Cheng's advice, Shen Zhou never sat the imperial examination Keju and never tried to pursue an official post. He lived reclusively for his entire life and spent most of his time reading, writing poetry, and painting. His uncles and father were all great painters, but had also made a family rule that artistic creation should solely be done for the purpose of self-entertaining and should never be used to exchange for money. Once, a poor and unknown artist forged some paintings in Shenzhou style, trying to sell for money to take care of his old mother. To make the forged paintings look more authentic, he actually came to visit Shenzhou with those paintings, hoping that Shenzhou could sign the forged works. Not only did Shenzhou sign them, He even retouched some parts of the painting and marked them with his seal. Another time, a monk sent a letter to Shenzhou asking for a painting. The monk wrote very specific requirements on how he wanted the cliff, trees, and waterfalls to be arranged, and how he wanted a monk looking into the clouds to be painted in the corner. We all know that this sort of requirement was considered very rude behavior for artists, but Shenzhou didn't mind. He painted as requested. Such a reaction of Shenzhou will definitely confuse people nowadays. However, if we think again, the life goal of literati, as described earlier, we can begin to realize that for the things that people care so much today, such as fame, reputation, money, was simply not within the scope for Shenzhou to even bother. As mentioned earlier, even though the young Chinese artists of the early 20th century embraced modernity and Western style art and tried so hard to break free from what they considered to be old and dated, it was still some of the traditional thoughts and values from pre-modern China that played the most important role in their mind, whether or not they were conscious of it. Paradoxically, when I study their life and works and look at the photos of these artists and other Chinese intellectuals of the Republican period, I always thought that they all look so modern, but at the same time show so much elegance of the traditional literati. In fact, I am not alone in feeling this way. In the secular culture of present-day China, people have actually formulated a term to describe this group of people in history, 民国范儿, literally meaning the charisma of the Republican period. Most people will not bother to explain what this charisma really is, but simply think that they look cool. Whatever I am certain is that this special quality that blends the two worlds is long gone. I hope this preliminary understanding of the literati spirit and the historical background of modern art in China provides the groundwork for us to look at the life and works of Lin Fengmian and Sanyu. Lin Fengmian, the early years. Beginning around the time of Lin Fengmian's death in the early 1990s, studies and literatures on his life and work were becoming more comprehensive. In the following section, I will introduce Lin's life chronologically while talking about and present pictures of his works. Lin Fengmian was born into a Hakka family in 1900 in the Mei County village in Guangdong province. His grandfather and father were both stonemasons, as recorded by Lin's adopted daughter Feng Ye. When Lin was 6, his mother, much younger than the husband and mistreated, attempted to run away with a man who had a dyeing workshop in the village, but was caught and punished. Consequently, his mother was eventually sold outside the village. This became Lin's most severe childhood trauma that affected his entire life. Perhaps it was also responsible for the melancholy seen in his personality and in his art. Some even believe that Lin's signature series of female figures, as seen in the slide, was a metaphor suggesting sentiments toward his mother. Lin talked about his female figures in his later years, and he said, "There were no models needed. The figures didn't exist, but I see them in my dreams." In his adult years, Lin still blamed himself for what had happened to his mother, due to the fact that the 5-year-old boy was so fascinated by the colors and the dyeing work that he always dragged his mother to take him to the workshop. However, this could be the earliest moment his artistic instinct was being manifested. The other inspiration in art came from his grandfather. In his childhood, Lin was always positioned next to him, watching the diligent old man work on the stones, drawing drafts and chiseling beautiful patterns day by day. Furthermore, the natural surroundings of Lin's childhood home became a strong and ongoing source of inspiration for his landscape series. Even in his 80s, A major portion of his recollections of his childhood continued as the sky and clouds, the fish in the river, the birds, the woods at the bottom of the hills, and the bamboo grove next to the houses in his home village. This strong sense of nostalgia can be felt so vividly when looking at Lin's landscape works. At age 8, Lin entered the local traditional style school in the village. In this period, he also began drawing. Through learning the 芥子园画谱, in English is the manual of the mustard seed garden, which was a drawing guide from the 17th century, like a Bible for artists who wish to learn the drawing skills required in traditional Chinese art. During middle school, Lin was already famous among his peers for his talent in art. He also loved literature and organized a poetry society. A school teacher, Liang Bocong, a traditional literati artist who recognized Lin's talent, so supported him building a solid foundation in classical Chinese literature and art at that very early age. Lin Fengmian's time in France from 1919 to 1926. In 1919, the 19-year-old Lin left home for Shanghai. China at that time witnessed drastic social changes in the aftermath of World War I. Central to this movement lay a strong sentiment to push for new culture and to learn from the West. In this atmosphere, the authorities launched numerous work-study programs and scholarships to encourage young students to pursue education in the West. Through such a scholarship, Lin left China for France in December 1919. Lin first entered the National School of Art in Dijon. As a reward for his outstanding performance, the principal, Ovid Yansis, successfully recommended Lin for the most prestigious National School of Fine Arts of Paris, where he entered the Corman studio. Corman was a French academic-style painter, but strongly suggested Lin to draw on traditional Chinese culture to search for inspiration. Lin had noticed that even Matisse and Picasso had adopted elements from the art of the East. Lin later found his home in the art museums in Paris, in particular the Guimet Museum. He subsequently developed a passion for China's ceramic art, especially the patterns in Song Dynasty ceramics. This particular interest is well manifested by Lin's use of lines and the translucency of color in many of his works. Lin also spent time in Germany in 1923, where he was deeply moved and inspired by expressionist artists such as Erich Henkel and Emil Node. In the same year, Lin married a young German woman, Alice von Roda. Sadly, not long after, Alice died from puerperal fever, while their newborn baby also passed away. Lin grieved for her so much that he still kept a photo of Alice on the wall during his final years in Hong Kong in the 1980s. Lin Fengmian from 1926 to 1949. Lin returned to China in February 1926, together with his second wife, Alice Batten. Upon arrival, Lin spent a short but productive time as the principal of the National School of Fine Arts in Beijing before moving south to Hangzhou in 1927, where he founded the Hangzhou National Academy of Fine Art. Many of his students during this time in Hangzhou became successful artists, such as Zhao Wuqi, Chu Taichun, Wu Guanzhong, and Ai Weiwei's father, Ai Qing. In his next 10 years in the Hangzhou Academy, Lin devoted himself completely to art education, focusing on the introduction of modern art and the blending of Western and Chinese art. His thoughts from that period are revealed in the many essays that he wrote and published in the school journals. In sum, he valued direct observation from nature as the most significant practice in both Western style and Chinese style painting. This can be clearly witnessed in his own works too, characterized by his free and expressive uses of lines, color, and composition, but at the same time indicating a clear reference to traditional Chinese artistry. Here is a paragraph from an essay attached to a painting. This is the painting which I'm going to talk about. This painting has been listed on Christie's website, and the essay reads like this: more elements hinting at the influence of the European art can be observed here. Different depths are established into the pictorial space by the layering of the lady, a cushion, a vase of flowers, and a window with light-filtering sheer curtain. Situating a figure in front of or near a window has been a widely used technique for centuries in European portraiture. The intentional disproportion between the objects and the figure recalls the still life paintings of French Impressionists such as Paul Cézanne. Yet, Lin Fengmian also adheres to his Chinese roots simultaneously. His depiction of the lady harks back to the elegant and slender renders of female figures who often wear a wistful expression while gazing at an object, popular during the Six Dynasties. The wispy band on her forehead is a demonstration of calligraphic strokes with a dry brush in the bracket. The unmistakable singular characteristics of Chinese brush painting. The simplified lines used to draw her hands and face reflect the influence of the apsaras painted on the walls of the Buddhist caves in Dunhuang. The decade in Hangzhou from 1927 to 1937 were the happiest years for Lin and his family. With his wife and daughter, they lived together inside the beautiful campus. However, their stay there was terminated by the outbreak of the Sino-Japanese War in the late 1937. He received his orders to retreat with teachers and students to southwest China, leaving the campus and many of his works behind, most of which were unfortunately destroyed during the war. During the retreat, due to the politics within the education system, he left his art academy post and arranged for his wife and daughter to seek shelter in Shanghai French concession. Thereafter, Lin moved to a rundown warehouse in Chongqing, where he spent 7 years living and painting in complete solitude till the end of the war in 1945. Many considered Lin's time in Chongqing a turning point for both his life and art. Life only became increasingly difficult. The drastic political changes impacting his life circumstances motivated him to rethink the meaning of life and art. From then on, he withdrew from the art circles and distanced himself from the romantic sentiment of art revolution. For him, art making had returned to its most basic status and very much in line with the literati spirit, a status of everlasting practice for Lin to combat the meaninglessness of his life and to peacefully live in a solitary life. During this period, he stopped oil painting and started focusing on using water-based mediums such as gouache on Chinese rice paper. During this period of time, the few years after 1949, during the first few years after 1949, Lin briefly returned to work as a teacher at the Hangzhou Art Academy that had undergone socialist reform. Nevertheless, his emphasis on freedom and the smell of capitalism in his modernist styles only meant trouble. Lin was condemned and put under surveillance. Lin's identity as an art educator ended here. During the next 26 years of his life, from 1952 to 1977, apart from the 4 years that he was in prison, Lin spent all of this time painting while living on a small income in his small apartment in Nanchang Road, Shanghai. As a result of change in policy towards foreigners, Lin's wife, Alice, has to leave China with their daughter, moving to Brazil in 1956. The Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976 brought Lin's worst nightmare. Anything considered capitalist became a target. There was no room for any modern art to survive, nor the modernist artists. In his attempt to evade the confiscation of his art, he destroyed a large portion, some say more than 1,000 pieces of his paintings, soaked in the bath and flushed down the toilet. Nevertheless, he was imprisoned and inhumanely tortured in the period from 1968 to 1972. He eventually was granted permission to leave China in 1977. During the 2 decades of art exploration from the 50s to the late 1970s, Lin developed and matured in a few categories of subjects: female figures, opera figures, still life, and birds. Settled in Hong Kong in 1977, Lin started living a more stable and peaceful life, but in art historian Michael Sullivan's words, Lin lived in deep seclusion. Nevertheless, in art, Lin had become even more productive and continued to paint and explore in the above-mentioned series till the very last moment of his life. An article published along with his 1989 show compared Lin's work with the renowned Japanese artist Kai Higashiyama's work. The author in the article pointed out that the dynamic feeling of motion in Lin's work is more prominent, but Kai's work, the Japanese artist, has shown more stillness. He traveled to Tokyo to attend his second Tokyo show at the age of 90 and made his last public appearance in an interview with the NHK television. Lin Fengmian passed away from a heart attack at age 90 in Hong Kong. I will first talk about the rediscovery of Sanyu. I encountered the name Sanyu for the first time in the winter of 2012 in the bookshop in the 798 Art Precinct during a visit to Beijing. There was 2 volumes of catalogs containing all of his works. I clearly remember that moment, flipping through the pages, instantly captivated by his art, and felt like something had touched my soul. The book starts with a prologue. Now we know that Sanyu exists. We look at his work, which is the center of his life. Sanyu's paintings speak of love and of being alone, living with a faraway memory of China. The reality of Sanyu's life, a proud, intelligent, honest, and poor artist. It is his soul he has given the flowers, the women, the fish, and the leopard, moving through life in silence and harmony. Rarely my friend would say thank you, but today he would say it with his smile. Although short, the prologue contains all the key information about Sanyu. It was written by Robert Frank, a New York photographer who kept a very close relationship with Sanyu for almost 2 decades of time. Sanyu's name and works were largely unknown until the mid to late 1990s. The rediscovery and recognition of the value of his art can be attributed to his 42 paintings being shipped to Taiwan's National Museum of History back in 1964 in preparation for an exhibition. Sanyu failed to travel to Taiwan for unclear reasons and was trying to retrieve the paintings. However, Sanyu died soon after as a result of gas leak in Paris, in his Paris apartment in 1966, while the paintings subsequently remained in the National Museum's storage in Taiwan. Sanyu's paintings in Taiwan were exhibited in 1978, but only caught the attention of Rita Wang from Southeast Taiwan when they were exhibited again in 1984. Fascinated by the discovery, in the following decades, Wang tirelessly promoted Sanyu through research, exhibition, auction, and publication. The aforementioned first volume of Sanyu's complete works, compiled by Rita Wang, had been published in 2001, with the second volume being published 10 years later. Born into a wealthy family in Nanchong, Sichuan province in 1901, Sanyu exhibited artistic talent in art from a very early age and started learning painting with his father, as well as learning calligraphy with a renowned calligrapher from age 12. Sanyu's sophisticated use of lines in many of his paintings can be traced back to his solid foundation in calligraphy. At age 20, Sanyu arrived in Paris to pursue art education and became friends with Xu Beihong and his wife Jiang Biwei, whereas, different to Xu or Lin, Sanyu displayed no interest in studying in an academic environment such as the National Academy of Fine Arts in Paris. He chose to attend the Academy of Shaomia, where he explored modern drawing techniques with no rules confined to conventional training. This tells us exactly about Sanyu's free-spirited characteristics. Perhaps Sanyu's privileged lifestyle was a major factor for the shaping of his uninhibited personality. His family had ensured he was financially well looked after. He enjoyed the vibrant city life and was also involved in art society activities together with Xu Beihong and other Chinese modernist artists. Following his peers, he spent 2 years in Berlin. But unlike Lin Fengmian, who held an ambitious goal to reform art in China, Sanyu didn't bother. He was more into the gatherings and parties among the society members. Jiang Biwei recalled that Lin, as Sanyu, was never on time for the gatherings and never bothered to stay longer to help clean up. Xu Zhimo, who was a modernist Chinese poet, was a friend of Sanyu. In a letter to artist Liu Haisu in early 1931, Xu mentioned that he received one of Sanyu's iconic nude paintings as a gift, and also described how much he liked Sanyu's modern Parisian-style apartment and studio and the mushroom noodles he cooked. During this time, from 1928 to 1931, Sanyu was married for 3 years to a French woman, Marceau. After that, Sanyu remained single and lived alone. This lifestyle didn't last too long following the decline of the family business back in China in the late 1920s. From 1930 to 1966, the final years in his life, he constantly struggled with finance. Paradoxically, his artistic exploration began to bloom from the same period. Sanyu started to paint with oil in 1929. His early paintings from the 1930s displayed sensitivity in the usage of lines. Large areas of white, black, and pink were features of this period. More colors had been introduced during his 1940s works with stronger contrast and more expressive brushstrokes. Although the techniques and style kept evolving, Sanyu was quite determined on his choice of subject matter from the beginning. Sanyu created 3 main types of works: the female nude, animals, and floral works. His nude series of the 1950s achieved a milestone, more vivaciously portrayed under new perspective and composition. 1950 to 1966 marked the final period of Sanyu's artistic exploration. In his animal and landscape paintings, the peacefulness and purity had been replaced with loneliness, desolation, and even danger. For Sanyu, Henry Rocher was an important patron and promoter. As Sanyu's very first collector, He bought many oil paintings and drawings and prints in the 1930s. Roche also acted as Sanyu's dealer and agent from 1929 to 1932, which noticeably increased Sanyu's productivity during this time. This short period of time marked the best commercial performance in Sanyu's life. Half of all the works that Sanyu ever created were from these few years. John Franco was another close friend and patron. He was a cousin of Vincent William van Gogh, who was Vincent van Gogh's nephew. Franco financially supported Sanyu while also promoting his paintings and organizing exhibitions for him in Belgium in the 1930s. Sanyu's productivity fell to drastic decline in the 1940s. He arrived in New York in 1948 and stayed for 2 years trying to promote a sport that he invented, based on tennis. His biggest reward from the New York Times was his acquaintance with the photographer Robert Frank. In 1997, Frank found Sanyu's unnamed grave in Paris, paid for its renovation, and erected a gravestone carved with his name in French and Chinese. In 2005, Frank made a short documentary film on Sanyu. In June 1997, Frank wrote, "Hello Sanyu, old friend. You have been gone a long way, and now you are back, your spirit, your dreams and your paintings. The pink gnus with their small feet, the lonely animals in Grandisle's empty landscapes, the flowers so elegant and cold. Today, would you be surprised? Years ago, when I arrived from New York, rang the bells at your studio in Paris. You open the door, you look at me, and every time you say, 'Qu'est-ce que tu fais ici?'" John Claude Rideau was another early collector who built a significant collection of Sanyu's works from the beginning of the 1960s. He recalled Sanyu in the following way. Sanyu, flower, animals, news, mostly demanding admiration, on the verge of pure beauty and far from any discord, which commands admiration. Here I am in a disrupted universe. Sanyu's pictures depict a motionless choreography whose simplicity is brought out by the mastery of space and bodies. The neutral shapes come out without excessive narration, and forms emerge with a tranquil identity, as though they arose from an ancient Eden in their tranquil identity. But do not be misled by this. Identity does not mean exact repetition. Repetition is foreign to Sanyu. He is a demanding artist, and far from an allegoric discourse, a mysterious presence emanates from his works, in which bodies are emblems. It was exactly attributed to the fact that Sanyu's style in Europe was so difficult to categorize and understand that led to very limited commercial success. On August 12, 1966, Sanyu was found dead, alone in his apartment. He had friends over late the previous night and cooked dinner with his old gas burner. Unmindful of the gas not being shut off properly, Sanyu went to read on his bed and died in his sleep. Lin and Sanyu used very different artistic techniques and visual language, but one common quality reflected in their art was the blending of East and West, or in other words, they both combined the literati spirit with Western modernity. They grew up in a transitional period of time when the old clashed with the new. In this process, the literati spirit that was once the dominant paradigm for pre-modern Chinese intellectuals had retreated to the interiority of this generation. When Lin and Sanyu actively embraced Western art and sought for new style, it was their interior literati spirit that was naturally flowing and in the lead, whether they were conscious of it or not. Paradoxically, they had in fact also strengthened their Chineseness through outward engagement and a sense of liberal sophistication. This study provides a new perspective to examine the psyche of this generation of Chinese modernist artists and with which to appraise their art, which has usually been oversimplified as a mix of East and West. Such a hybrid, with no clear boundaries, indeed represents a coexistence of tension and harmony across cultures and identities. This perspective even provides a lens for us to analyze the art of today, the contemporary art that strives to provide thoughts and raise questions pertaining to our even more complex society and world. I would like to quote Anthony Gormley, one of my favorite artists, to conclude today's talk. The unfinished project of modernism has to do with its claim to find a visual language that speaks to all human beings, irrespective of race, creed, gender, of language group. Modernity built a structure of empirical rationalism on the mind work of the Enlightenment, itself based on the humanism of the Renaissance. And whilst the universalism of modernism has become increasingly questionable in the cultural wars of today, its utopian vision of a visual language that accepts the primacy of experiential truth and that can unite people in their difference is still an urgent goal in an ever more divided world. It is for this reason that I believe the promise modernism deserves to be fought for. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. It's such a fabulous, talk, and a couple of things that impressed me so much is and told us a lot is firstly, your slides are just stunningly beautiful, and each one is a piece of artwork. So precision, the composition clearly can see you as an artist and also artists who appreciate other people's artworks. It's quite amazing. And second point I want to make is the two stories. I mean, there are a lot of stories about these two main characters, really touching and sad as they are, but also really moving and inspiring. That I didn't know those stories in detail until today. So it's really, really beautiful. And the third point is actually quite interesting, having listened to your talk, and I feel I know a lot more about you as a person and as an artist. You are such a knowledgeable and learned scholar. You studied all this and have deep interest in other artists and in history, and also obviously all these, your knowledge and your appreciation of other artists have influenced you. So
Absolutely.
I'll ask a couple of questions. If the audience, I know we run out of time, but if you have questions, please post onto the Q&A. Dapeng, you can unshare the screen so people can see you.
Yeah. Oh, right. Sorry. I clicked the button, but I didn't want.
Yeah.
So sorry, I need to speed up a little bit because I realized we run out of time.
No, it's just so beautiful. I don't want to disrupt you. I also want to say, yes, clearly you spent a lot of time to preparing it in such a great preparation, and I can see you are a perfectionist. So like every single little detail, you are so precise. So it's a chance to share joy to listen to your talk and to see all the pictures, paintings that you selected. Just stunning. One is a general question, because I did my PhD in modernism in literature, and specifically modernism in Australian literature, there are two extremes. So one is embracing blindly, up to being blindly. The other extreme is just a strong resistance. What did you find like a modern art movement in China?
I think it's hardly black or white. It's such a complex mix, and especially for this generation of artists like Lin Fengmian, I think they are so special because they lived in the Republican period. It was short, chaotic, but it played a very important role in shaping the psyche of those generation. And but sadly, like I said, modernism didn't continue in China. It was cut short by the socialist revolution. So I think each period of time has their own characters, and we can't look at things at the two extremes, and really need to pay attention to the historical background and to all the other factors that affects what's happening back then.
What made you to pick these two artists to focus your interest and your research and in today's talk?
Yeah, it was quite intuitive from the beginning because I really love their art. So that's like a foundation of my choice. And of course, I have other artists that I adore. But I think to pick Sanyu is the fact that he's the type of artist rarely seen from his generation, that he spent most of his life in Paris. He didn't return to China. And then, different to Zhao Wuqi, he didn't make a great success while he was alive. So I think that provides another angle for us, because Lin Fengmian is more familiar to more audiences. So I think, and they basically born in the same time. I think it produces a good contrast, and to look into that bit of history.
Indeed. I remember 2018 or 2019, we went to Taiwan in Taiwan Chinese Culture University. They made a solo show of Zoiki, Zhao Wuqi, and it's so beautiful. As you said, he wasn't famous while he was alive. I also, as I mentioned, after listening to your talk and saw these two artists' paintings, I felt that I know a little bit more about your own paintings. So, for example, am I right to say that I feel like you were influenced, for example, when your portrait of Cao Yin, and because when I saw the Lin Fengmian's lady, that painting, and it just reminds me of the
splendidness. Yes, absolutely. I had a direct reference in the portrait of Cao Yin. I made a direct reference to the Song Dynasty porcelain. I think probably I didn't straightly think about Lin Fengmian's artwork when I was creating the portrait, but I think at the back of my mind, it will always be what you love and what you pay attention to that affects your creativity.
Absolutely. And I also felt like your landscape possibly has some influence from them as well, because I sort of can read from Lin Fengmian's winter colors, that painting, and I see some of yours, or at least influence from him.
Absolutely, yeah. And also influence from Sanyu as well.
The Vasa especially.
Yes. And as well as because Sanyu combine landscape and animals together, and I really love the way he portrayed the landscapes in those works, and I think it definitely has inspired my style, to some extent. Yes.
I mean, Sanyu in particular lived a quite hard life. his life story had some impact on you?
Uh,
The way you see artist life, or artist.
yeah, it makes you think. Yeah, but both of their life stories are fascinating. Sanyu's whole life was, I mean, he had a good time when he was quite young, but it ended very soon. And similar to Lin, he enjoyed success. He recalled that he used to have chauffeurs, drivers driving him around while he was a principal, and suddenly it was the war, and it was just black and white difference to him, and but he adjusted himself.
Yes.
Yeah.
His strength must be incredible, because he suffered the loss of his wife and then baby.
Yeah.
And then he lived a very long life, though. So he must have seen a lot and endured a lot. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and he painted it till the very end. So his life would be quite interesting. I think I asked you before, because you started Chinese art history in Australia, in Sydney University. What's the difference of studying Chinese art history in China as in Australia? And why did you study Chinese art history in the West?
Right. I think I also got this question before from other people. Yeah, because I can't have a direct comparison because I didn't do similar studies in China. But I would say that the academic study structure and the modern type of education was started from the West, where it's a whole system based on like philosophy and literature. And so when I was thinking to study art history in Australia, I actually first started looking at the introduction of the professors of across different universities. Yeah, so that was the beginning, because so that time I came across John Clark's, who was my former professor supervisor. I came across John's work, and I was fascinated by the angle that he used to look into this part of history, and I've just never experienced, never seen similar things when I was back in China. And so it was really because of the people and their work that attracted me, that I want to get in touch and tell them my ideas. So it basically started from there. Yeah.
Well, I sort of can relate to that, because I'm very interested in reading non-Chinese people's books, articles about China, about their experiences in China. Because when I read those articles, their observations, their experiences, I found it quite fascinating, because angles, as you mentioned, the perspectives are very different, and they see things that when I was there I didn't see, or I didn't think of that way. So I found quite fascinating the things that can be seen from many perspectives, and often in a satirical or ironical way that I didn't pick if you are inside. So it's
right.
yes, you sort of get more out of it.
While you're outside the
Yes, that's right. Yes, when you look at it from outside, and also assuming other people's perspectives as well. And the last question before we end is, do you find, because you have this very deep and strong, intense academic interest or scholarly interest in, art history, other people's work from history perspective, do you find that impact on you or impede your artistic creation, or actually enabled your artistic creation?
I think both. Yeah, for different period of time. Sometimes the information and the thoughts that you have processed in your brain will be helpful. but sometimes it can become too overwhelmingly heavy that you actually want to clean it up a little bit and to have more space, like because artistic creation is difficult, and I think there's also a big portion of luck in there. Sometimes I have a lucky day. I'll have very smooth creation period, but sometimes I just got stuck, and I found it not very beneficial when I'm stuck and still try to find inspiration from reading or like processing all those thoughts. Sometimes you just need to start again. And so I think there's a balance in that. And it's because it's so difficult to elaborate that it is also charming, in a way that attracts you to keep on create. Yeah.
Very good answer, and so truthful and so insightful, knowing how you see the world and how you work. We can keep talking. I'm really interested, and your thoughts and your knowledge, and the way you see the world, the way you create in your artistic world is really fascinating. And thank you so much, Dapeng, for this wonderful talk and for all the effort and you put in. It's really appreciated, and I love this talk. So we will upload the video onto our website, and people who have missed out, they can watch it. And I think I saw one question, perhaps. Oh, it's just a wonderful. Megan Dix said, so thank you so much. It was wonderful. So I truly agree. I think it's really, really wonderful. So yeah, thank you so much, Dapeng. I would like also, to say that the next lecture of IAC Art Talks will be given by Jackie Menzies, who is a former senior curator of New South Wales Art Gallery and the president of TASA. So looking forward to that. We will send out the information later on. But before that, before we finish, I also want to say that we are having the biggest event of the year, which is a dual event. Yanni, can you put on the slide so I can? And we send out the invitations. If you haven't seen it, please contact us, or you can just simply scan the QR code to register. It's going to be really exciting, and the annual address by the one and only, such a famous expert in Chinese modern contemporary art, Professor Claire Roberts. And also in the meantime, we're going to have the photographic works exhibition by Warren Duncan, who was the second ABC China correspondent sent to China from 1975 to 1978. It was just an incredible time in Chinese history. So many of his photos you have never seen is in his private collection. They are just fascinating, blow my mind. So I hope you will be able to come, and then you can register. So we have a few people saying that you are brilliant. Thank you. Thank you again, Dapeng. And thanks everyone, and hopefully you see you next time. Have a good evening.
Bye.